So I'm going to be talking about a specific ansatz for the variational quantum eigensolver and some things that we can try and do to reduce the resources for it. So in some VQE loop, we have a few different elements of this which we can modify to suit our needs best. So here I've put up that we can split up the Hamiltonian which we're trying to find the ground state energy for through measurement reduction by finding commuting observables which can be measured simultaneously. But we can also try to reduce the resources of preparing the ansatz state for which we're optimizing over the parameters. What I haven't put up is that, importantly, you can do lots of cool stuff with the classical minimization algorithm, or alternatively replace it with, say, imaginary time evolution or adaptational methods. But we're going to focus on reducing the resources of preparing the ansatz state here. So importantly, remember, we're running things on NISC devices, so we have a bunch of pretty prohibitive limitations, and the aims of all of our compilation should be to try to adhere to these limitations. And in particular here, we're going to try to remove unnecessary entangling gates. Entangling gates on NISC devices bear a heavy cost. They are approximately an order of magnitude more error prone, and also take about an order of magnitude longer to perform. So the unitary coupled cluster ansatz, which is what I'm going to be talking about here, starts off by taking some reference state and exciting it using some fermionic operators. So we have the reference state phi 0, and we're exciting it with this exponential sum of tau's. In order to perform this on a quantum computer, we need to perform a Trotter expansion of this exponential sum. So in the limit where rho goes to infinity, this is the this product that we have below here in number 2 is the same as the exponential sum, but typically we truncate at some low rho for NISC devices. And after we have performed this Trotterization, I have shown just here the simple Lie trotter, but you can do more complicated Trotterization. The tau's are then encoded in terms of Pauli tensors acting on qubits, where we have some coefficient A and some Pauli tensor of I, X, Y, and Z. The precise encoding is determined by at the application level, so it could be Bravik-Taib, it could be plane wave, could be Jordan-Wigner. And lastly, when we have this product of Pauli's, each one of them can naively be expressed as a circuit using, for example, here C0s and some arbitrary single qubit gates. And I'm introducing the notation that we have some P of alpha and a Pauli string. So the tensor product is implicit in the strings. This is I tensor X tensor Y tensor Z, and the alpha is some angle specifying the rotation angle of our Z rotation in the middle here. And the reason why I'm assuming C0 gates here, I want to spend a bit of time talking about this. So there are a variety of different native hardwares, and many of these can do non-Clifford two-qubit gates that are much more expressive. But because these differ quite a lot from hardware to hardware, we're, for the purposes of this compilation, assuming that we're going down to C0s. So all of these hardwares should be able to perform either C0s or some other Clifford two-qubit gate for which local unitaries are sufficient to transform into C0s. And bear in mind that these local unitaries are cheap, as in they won't require entangling gates. Okay, so the overall recipe for the strategy that I want to talk about here is to first of all take the product of Pauli exponentials and rearrange these how we want into mutually commuting sets so that our Pauli exponentials all commute. And this should be very familiar to anybody used to measurement reduction. We would then want to diagonalize these sets using some shallow Clifford blocks. And the point of the first two processes is to then allow us to use the power of phase polynomials to synthesize the resulting z-basis Pauli exponentials efficiently. So first of all, let's talk a bit about the rearranging of Pauli exponentials. So the Trotter expansion that we took introduces some error, which is determined by the anti-commuting terms in our expansion. If all of the terms were to freely commute, then the expansion would be exact and we wouldn't require we wouldn't induce any error. So in general, we have some anti-commuting Paulis. So a brief refresher of what that means is that if we have two Pauli exponentials A and B, then they commute if and only if they have an even number of anti-commuting individual Pauli terms. So on the bottom here, we have some examples, A1, B1, and C1. And A1 and B1 obviously commute because YY and XX that's two terms that anti-commute, but the property isn't transitive. So even if A1 B1 commute and A1 C1 commute, B1 and C1 do not necessarily commute. Okay, so when we're doing this this resequencing of our circuit that we're going to be generating, we are changing the semantics of that circuit, importantly. So because we're going to be inducing a different error, in general, less error, but the point is that the semantics of our circuit will be slightly different. So this isn't an exact compilation. And finding sets of these mutually commuting Pauli exponentials is, as has been shown in the literature on measurement reduction, is equivalent to the graph coloring problem. So we have each vertex corresponds to a Pauli term, and there is an edge between two vertices if and only if those Pauli terms anti-commute. And so we want to perform the graph coloring problem on this, but this is an NP-hard problem, so we can use greedy heuristics instead. And once we have colors for all of our different sets, we are then going to sequence these Pauli exponentials by color into our circuit. We don't care about the order within a set because the terms all mutually commute, and we don't care about the order between sets for now. So we now have a sequence of Pauli terms determined by this greedy heuristic, and I want to take you on a brief interlude to discuss the ZX calculus, which gives us a nice representation of what we'll do next. So we have a bunch of spiders, which you can think of as being tensors in some tensor network, and wires between them, which we're going to contract over in terms of this tensor network. And we have two types of spider, green and red, corresponding to Z and X basis correspondingly, with some angles associated with them. And we can represent linear maps between Hilbert spaces using these tensor networks. And we can also generate kind of states by having tensor networks without any input wires. And we can do Choi-Jamalkovsky isomorphism trivially by bending a wire around in space. So we have some examples of some particular cases of this, where we have X basis preparation, which is a small green node with a wire coming out of it. We have arbitrary single qubit Z rotation, and the corresponding dual basis versions. And in particular, we can represent all the gates which we care about for the purposes of this compilation using ZX. So we have all the single qubit X rotations and Z rotations, where we are denoting, we have plus and minus for the S and S dagger, being the Z rotation by pi over 2 and Z rotation by minus pi over 2 correspondingly. And we introduce a notation for Hadamard, being this yellow box on the right. Okay, so why do we care about this? Because it gives us a kind of convenient and elegant representation of the of particular structures in our circuit. So here we have what's called phase gadgets. So phase gadgets correspond to a particular structure in our circuit that has a bunch of convenient algebra. So on the top left, we have some decomposition rules where we have a phase gadget which can be decomposed into C-naughts, iteratively, step by step. And on the right, we have a merge rule for phase gadgets and a commutation rule as well. And this can all be proved diagrammatically, but alternatively, it's very easy to do using linear algebra, because the phase gadget is just equivalent to a Pauli exponential, where all of your Paulis are Zs. And this can be generalized to the case that we had at the start, where we have some Pauli exponential over I, X, Y, and Z. And that looks like this, where we have a phase gadget and then single qubit Cliffords on either side to conjugate it, to convert it to the correct bases. And we introduced some notation for this, which is just a more compressed version, where we have red/green and green squares to represent the X, Y, and Z Pauli bases, respectively. And this is exactly the same thing that I showed at the start, that was decomposed into C-naughts and single qubit Cliffords in circuit notation. So we have some commuting sets of these Pauli gadgets, and we want to look for ways to diagonalize these, to convert these into the form where they have some shallow layer of Cliffords at the start, a sequence of purely phase gadgets in the middle, because they will only be Z basis, and then another sequence of the conjugate shallow Clifford circuit at the end. So the way that we go about doing this is through what's called compatible pairs of qubits, which we define in our paper. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this particular definition and theorem. I'd rather show you how it works. So the idea is that if we have some commuting set of Pauli gadgets, and we want to convert one of the qubits in this set into just having the Z basis on all of our gadgets, then we want to find some valid way of inducing this using some C-naughts and single qubit Cliffords. And here we have an example where you can imagine that the Pauli gadgets extend down into some more qubits such that this set commutes. So given this, we can verify that the two qubits at the top are valid in the sense that they are a compatible pair. And we can see this by noting that if you check on each gadget what Pauli we have, then there you can find an A and a B that satisfies this this compatibility. And in this case, the A and B that satisfies this is Y for both A and B. And because it is Y, you also know the correct single qubit conjugations to convert it to the Z basis. So we start off by some with V and V dagger, single qubits on either side, and then this converts our compatible pair into a form such that this is satisfied for Z and Z. Which means that we can just use a single C0 on either side to what's called diagonalize this qubit in a somewhat abusive notation. Okay, so we want to find these compatible pairs, and given some example commuting set, we do this repeatedly. Note that not all pairs are compatible. We have done a little bit of work on finding cases where this isn't possible. So where we require more than n C0s on either side to diagonalize a set. And the reason why we're doing this kind of heuristic method is because we care a lot about the raw number of C0s. So not just kind of the upper bound given by kind of Aronson, but the raw number that we can that are required. Okay, so after we have found a bunch of compatible pairs and introduced C0s and single qubit gates, we have the mutually commuting set that is in this form shown here. And that's when we can use the expressive power of phase polynomials. So the interior of the subcircuit here is purely Z basis, and therefore can be represented as what's called phase polynomials. So on the left we have a phase gadget, which, bear in mind, this is equivalent to a Z basis Pauli exponential. And on the right we have the action of this phase gadget on the input basis states. So we have we induce some phase corresponding to the XOR of the input bits. And this means that if we have a sequence of phase gadgets, they can all be represented kind of algebraically in this manner. And we can then call upon the large existing literature of phase polynomials for synthesis to convert these into C0s and single qubit gates. I don't want to go into all the phase polynomial literature here, but there is some great work by Matthew Amy on what's called gray synth, which is another heuristic method. So there's a common theme here of finding heuristics which appear to work in practice and then stitching them together. And this heuristic method, we find, tends to produce synthesized circuits which have a low number of C0s and single qubit Z rotations. And so this is an example of what would happen after you run the previous example through gray synth. And all of the work that we're doing in compilation here carries with it some associated computational cost. So if we have m being the number of Pauli terms that we started off with in our trotterized expansion, and n being the number of qubits, then graph coloring takes order m squared n, and this is there's been some work to reduce the time taken in practice for things like measurement reduction. And diagonalisation, finding compatible pairs, is cubic in the number of qubits, and gray synth is also cubic in the number of qubits. And there's also some upper bounds on the number of C0s that we produce, but this isn't very enlightening. But the takeaway of this part is that the classical computational cost pretty heavy for doing this. Bear in mind that if we are doing this on some realistic molecule, and the number of Pauli terms is dictated by the orbitals in our system, then m could be n to the 4, which really sheds some light on how expensive this could be in terms of number of orbitals. Okay, but if we go through all this stitching together of heuristics, we find that in practice, for a variety of different encodings and molecules and basis sets, we acquire a C0 depth and a C0 count of approximately an order of magnitude lower than what one would get if you were to do it naively. And also lower than previous methods which we've attempted in the past. So on the plus side, this method is extremely generic, so it works for any structure of the form of this trotterized product of Pauli exponentials. It admits a very convenient diagrammatic representation, which lets us manipulate it in a way which is fairly easy to describe and reason about, and we get some pretty large circuit reductions. However, frustratingly, we can't prove any bounds on. So we can't say, for example, that this takes down the circuit depth from say n to the 5 to n to the 4, or n to the 4 to n to the 3. Our method doesn't take into account the connectivity of the device, which is important if you're working on NIST devices. We have some ideas for how this might work with connectivity in mind. The compilation time is quite severe. And also we don't know yet whether it's better than the low rank decomposition methods of Mario Motta from 2018, because we haven't managed to acquire a working implementation yet. But we recommend that you try this out for your own Unitary Coupled Cluster Ansatz and see what kind of circuit sizes you get out. And there's an archive link here as well that you can go check out. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, Alexander. We're running a bit out of time. So, and
sorry.
Any question, no problem. And then, so I suggest to take this into the Slack channel and discuss further questions and details on the talk over there.